it's really hard to get into. So metaphor we always use when we talk about literature, that you're getting into the narrative, you're able to build a proper text world that you can visualize when you're reading. So we want to look at what makes it so difficult, what makes it so ambiguous to read this novel. Generally, we can look at the negative constructions that start from the very beginning of the text, and that's something that really affects your reading. Also, the narrative is a first-person narrative where the whole story is told through the eyes of a handmaiden whose job is to bring children for the higher officials of the state, Gilead. Finally, we'll talk about how this ambiguous world building can actually be quantitatively proven. So for those of you who love linguistics, yes, this is corpus evidence that this building of this text world is difficult, it's strange, it's weird. All right, let's go on. So, The Handmaid's Tale was written by Margaret Atwood in 1985. It has won awards for science fiction, even though the author herself, she says, no, this is speculative fiction, it's different from science fiction, there's no aliens, there's no spaceships, and so on and so forth. However, she does get the Arthur C. Clarke Award and all of these Nebula Awards, which are for science fiction. So this kind of tells you a little bit about this conversation that we have about what is genre, who decides it? Is it the readers or is it the author? But it's a whole debate, let's not go into it today. Let's look at the very first part of the novel. She starts off talking about a past text world. So in textual theory, we talk about creating these cognitive spaces in your mind that are triggered by the text. So it's a text-driven theory of processing language, or actually any type of discourse. So Paul Worth, in 1999, he has this monograph that was collected after his death. So it describes the theory in general. It's based on cognitive science, and it just talks about how you process not only text, but anything in the world. Okay? So, when you look here, she's talking about how they were moved into these containment camps where they were brainwashing them before they made them into these vessels for procreation. So here we have, at the beginning, we slept in what had once been the gymnasium. So this sentence alone I could tell you like the whole 20 minutes about. But just in brief, we can say a very simple sentence such as, we slept in what was the gymnasium. But because she also adds what had been once the gymnasium, that even pushes it further from your point of reference in the novel. So when you're beginning the novel, you're not even starting it in the same location that the narration is happening. So as a reader, you're already confused from the very beginning. The floor was of varnished wood, with stripes and circles painted on it, for the games that were formerly played there. The hoops for the basketball nets were still in place, though the nets were gone. The balcony ran around the room for the spectators, and I thought I could smell, faintly, like an after-image, the pungent scent of sweat, shot through with the sweet taint of chewing gum and perfume from the watching girls, felt skirted as I knew from pictures, later in miniskirts, then pants, then in one earring spiky green streaked hair. What does this remind you of? Being a teenager, right? You go through these phases of fashion. And then, dances would have been held there. The music lingered. A palimpsest of unheard sound. So the sound is not there. It's unheard. Style upon style, an undercurrent of drums, a forlorn wail, garlands made of tissue paper flowers, cardboard devils, a revolving ball of mirrors, powdering the dancers with a snow of light. Now I know I read it dramatically, but it does read like a poem. It is difficult language. So for the average reader, this is complicated textual building from the beginning. So let's look sentence by sentence. This is a textual diagram for people who are interested in textual theory. And you notice that from the very beginning, we have what had once been the gymnasium. So you have here, what had once been the gymnasium is an inaccessible past world, okay? The games that were formerly played there, again, we're going back to the past world. The nets for the basketball hoops are gone, negation. We have the pungent scent of sweat. Pungent is a negative word, but it is an inherent negation, so semantically negative. We have the taint of chewing gum. We also have would have been there, so you have this modality that's pushing this narrative further from you. And an undercurrent of drum of forlorn. Forlorn! How negative is that word, right? So, again, all these words are negative, either semantically, syntactically, and they have been pushed into this past world where the enactor is not really within at the same time. This happens throughout the narrative, because not only do we have flashbacks to the world before Gilead, but we also have flashbacks to her life with her family before she became this handmaid that just listens to people. It also tells you about all these times where she was with her mother or when she was with her friend. But again, these are things that are not in the main narrative of the story. So whoever's reading the story does not realize what's going on, because there is no textual indication for when these jumps happen. You suddenly get a pronoun. Oh yes, she was beautiful. She was a so-and-so. But who is she? And it turns out it's her daughter. So it's a text that really forces you to reread, and that's not what a normal reader does. And that can probably lead to this ambiguous world building as well. So, majority of world-building processes occur in negated, inaccessible worlds to the reader and to the character as well, because she's only reflecting on it in the past. Look at this sentence. This is the part where she's discussing the very beginning of the main narrative. A chair, a table, a lamp. For my students, is that a full sentence? No. So, from the beginning, you have this list of items, this list of world builders that is not really contained within sentences, and it kind of reflects how this character has a specific world view. Louise Nuttall in 2015, she wrote this mind style based analysis of the text, and she's talking about how this worldview is reflected in the constructions that she uses. So she looks at cognitive grammar and how that is reflected throughout the text. And in this case, you see that she just mentions items, even though when we continue reading, she's describing her room that she's been in for months. So how are you using indefinite articles of a, when you're describing something you've been seeing for months and months? So think about what they wear. The handmaids wear these weird hats that kind of restrict their view. It restricts how they see the world. And this is kind of reflected in the text itself. So a chair, a table, a lamp. It's like blinkers on a horse. You can't really see the world around you. And that's how she describes things. Again, here you also have more negation going on. If you think about spaces and empty spaces, like lacuna and figures, you can see here it says, in the center, a black space plastered over, like the place, in a face, where the eye's been taken out. So what is this? This is the hole in the ceiling where the chandelier used to be, and they said they removed it because a lot of the handmaids were killing themselves. So already we're having this verbose, dark world created just because you have this glimpse of suicide, of death. And also you have that beautiful image of a face without an eye. Again, negations going on from the very beginning. So, the perspective of narration portrays a particular mind style which is not familiar to the readers. This adds another layer of ambiguity throughout the story. Simile overuse. So my main analysis actually looked at reader responses to the text. And this is one of the interesting responses I found on Goodreads. Here it says, worst of all is Atwood's obsession with simile. She crowns similes into every corner of her sentences. And yeah, this reader's not very happy about it, so she gave the story only 1 star out of 5. Okay. So this is what we consider as a dispreferred response to art, because usually if something's artistic or literary, you would say, oh, you have to have some appropriation, you have to have some appreciation of the art itself. But a lot of readers on Goodreads, they would give 1 star for various reasons. But I thought, what if this person actually has a point? What if there is overuse of similes? So the only way to actually know if there is overuse is to do it quantitatively. Also, the use of simile kind of slows down the processing of the text. because you do need more cognitive power processing a metaphor than to process a normal sentence. So you say here, I lie there very still, or I lie there like a dead bird. So the meaning is kind of similar, but the second sentence requires more processing on the part of the reader in order to understand it. There's another point in the story where she actually, in her similes that she uses, usually a simile is to compare something unfamiliar with something familiar. So if you don't know who Juliet is, you say Juliet is the sun, so you know that Juliet's bright, she's beautiful, and so on and so forth. But here, look at this simile. I walk along the gravel path that divides the back lawn, neatly, like a hair party. So you know the images of the back lawn, and there's a little path, and then you have the hair parting. Well, you always try to make it straight. Mine's never straight. But at the same time, these are two familiar things in the everyday world. And she's comparing the familiar with the familiar rather than the unfamiliar with the familiar. So this creates some kind of, it stops you, like thinking, why is she comparing the gravel in the path and the hair parting? I know what both of them are. So using Ancon, looking at the top 100 most secret words in the novel, like actually shows up number 30 on the list. So most of the words were all like items like, because it's a first person narration, I was of course the most occurring word in the novel, but also you had words like the and connectives and so on and so forth. So it becomes actually one of the first content words that shows up in the novel. And on the list, even though it occurs in 565 times, 307 of them are similes. 307 similes in the book. Is this a lot? We can't say yes until we do a quantitative analysis and compare it to a corpus. Okay, so in order to make it valid data. So looking at the concordances, of course, there's sometimes when like is used not as a simile, but in the meaning of I prefer or I like something, I like ice cream, so on. So we have to say here, I like to say she blew up Jezebel's, so that's what she wanted. But here, these are similes on the bottom. You see these concordances? It says, it sounded so metallic, like a mousetrap or a weapon. So notice, is the mousetrap and weapon, does it have the same sound? It doesn't. So it kind of creates, again, this weird ambiguous image. Like, why is she comparing a simile to something that's not really explained carefully? So in corpus stylistics, keywords are the words that appear significantly more frequently in a text compared to a reference corpus. We need to make sure that the calculation of the log likelihood is more than 6.63. And these are the words that I looked at. Most of them are related to what I would think is an ambiguous world-building item. So these words actually occur really high up on the most frequent 100 words of the corpus. And you notice here that my log likelihood is not over 6, it's actually over 260. So that is very, very, very highly significant. It means that the word like occurs in this novel more than any other prose item that I found in the BNC. Okay? Other words, also one, time, no, something. These are very ambiguous as well. Because the word no, she always talks about, oh, I know that this is supposed to be like this. And remember, this is a first-person narration, so already it is kind of something that you can't really rely on. Is it a reliable narrator or not? And you notice that all of them are very highly significantly occurring in the text. So these repetitive ambiguous structures are actually quantitatively significant as well. So it's not only that one reader who thinks, oh, she uses simile too much. It's actually true. You can prove it with the numbers and the data. So, this analysis shows you that the text is ambiguous. We can't really blame readers for saying, oh, this is so weird, her writing's weird. Yes, it is weird, but it is purposefully so. Because we show you that building these text worlds allows for creation of this ambiguous dark setting. Remember, this is a dystopia. It is a controlling government. They're controlling their individuals. And in a way, the author's controlling the reader by giving her this difficulty in reading the text. The negative subworlds in the initial world building from the very beginning. This text doesn't start like the usual dystopia. Usually dystopia starts in media res, in the middle of the dystopia happening, but this shows you what happens before. And that's interesting because it's not what usually happens in dystopia. And the specific worldview portrayed in the text further encourages this almost disbelief when you're reading it, because it is such an exaggeration of the society of the world today. But at the same time, if you think about it, it was written back in 1984 and 1985. So it's a very different world back then as well. And people said, no, there's no way the America of today will happen like this. There's no way they can remove the government in a few days. And I found all these responses in Goodreads a lot. But it's because this text challenges their own worldview by presenting this very specific, limited woman who looks through the world in glimpses. Finally, we have the frequency of the unclear descriptions and the similes and the quantitative overuse of these vague world builders, whether it is the empty words like one, knows, and time, or if it is the similes that compare the unfamiliar